Welcome to the third Sunday Forum. I am honored today to welcome Ken Bauman, and I will turn it over to him to do the formal welcome today too. But just a reminder that the next third Sunday Forum will be September 18th and at 10 a.m. again in the City Hall, and it'll be the CU and some stories public providers. So we have panel discussions with Ken Bauman and Evan, and then we'll listen to John.
Thank you and welcome to the forum for the gallery, 405 gallery, and this is a morality. Wonderful display of social justice art. We invited him here. This is an interesting story of how we got here. And unfortunately, the person that got this started is not here because of this COVID.
Oh.
That was scandal huge. And probably this one means that this is what I anyway, he started off by, I think, met you at an art fair or something that he was doing, and he saw the posters and he said, we have to have him come. Because that's been a focus of our church for quite a while, social justice in many different ways. And so we invited him to come with his posters, which they graciously wrapped and sent to us. We're all set to put them up. And they will be up another month, and will be up through September. And we have been very pleased with the outcome that we've had from that. People have been very interested in looking at them and hopefully gaining information from them. Well, this is the first time I've met Ricardo also. Although I feel like I know him, we emailed back and forth, I don't know how many times. I both with think about the email. There were many communications. So we're so happy to have it here. Thank you for raising it. I'm going to really turn it over to him to tell you about himself. I think that would be more interesting than me trying to tell you about him. And then I think we'll open it for questions. If there's questions about his artwork, or his life, or whatever, I know I have a couple that I'd like to ask him. We'll wait for that. So I think we'll start, and we'll put it over to you, Ricardo. Let's go ahead and
hello. So yes, I'm Ricardo and so I grew up in the coffee growing mountain of Western Puerto Rico. Coffee always holds a special place in my heart. To walk to school, and the coffee blossomed, or later farmers used to spread the coffee they grew for their own households out on cloth sacks and burlap sacks out by the side of the road to dry in the sun. So I think where I'd like to start is with telling you about my teacher, which was really the forest. I grew up playing in the forest, with farm and forest playing with birds. And it's only in later years, after decades working in both art and social justice, that I realized that the way in which I approached this work was really based on what I learned playing on those muddy mountainsides. And some examples of that, for example, as a child in the country, one of the things I could observe is that if there's a depression in the ground and it's raining, and water enters it and fills it up faster than it drains out, it's going to overflow. Or if it drains out faster than it fills, it's going to empty out. I don't think very many people in Congress know that. I grew up in a world where nothing had a forward button or a pause button. Television even was just starting to enter that part of the mountains, and those families that did get television, the reception was very poor. There were only 2 programs that could get through. The one I mostly remember is a show called "The Evil Thing in This Classroom." It was lost in space, built in Japan.
Will Robinson.
So no fast forward, but it means that if birds lay an egg, a hummingbird, or a lizard who laid an egg and you see their nest, you can't just quickly go to the good part. You can't cut to the chase, right? Things happen in cycles, with rainy seasons, dry seasons, with lunar cycles, everything moves, ebbs and flows. Also, when you watch a lizard and a scorpion engage in mortal combat, which is like watching a Jurassic Park in slow motion, except that they're only 2 inches long. But if you're getting close and you watch that, there's no way you can fit that into a narrative of good guys and bad guys. Right? Here you have two creatures trying to do what they need to do, trying to survive, get their needs met as best they can with the skills that they have in the environment that they find themselves in. When I moved as a preteen, as a young teenager to Chicago in the late 1960s, that served me well. I was really attracted to those forms of organizing that took that into account, that aren't about trying to set these good, bad, dichotomies. In part because, like any creature of the forest, all organisms need to have accurate information about what's going on around them in order to not get eaten, and in order to find what we need to survive. We need the resources that we need. So it never felt satisfying to have these kinds of narratives, because if I convince myself that the people who oppose me are evil, and I am just plain old good, that's the way it is, I'm putting myself in danger because I'm not giving myself the gift of accurate information about my environment. So that if I'm really committed to making change, not just fighting the good fight, but really making change, it means that I have to understand why people behave the way they do, or at least understand it. So art is really just a form of communication. A person creates art. I create art because I want you to think something, or feel something, or do something, like any other form of communication. And also this morning I was thinking about how important art has been in the accumulation of knowledge. Right? Can you imagine? I mean, here we are in the city of Mayo Clinic. How could that tradition have developed without drawings of anatomy? Sometimes the differences between two species of beetles are so subtle, you can't describe them, you have to draw them. Engineering is done drawing. It's not by accident that Leonardo da Vinci was also an artist. And these are forms of telling us what happens. Actually making the invisible visible, or making the visible visible to each other in a new way. So I always grew what mattered to me, what was important. My parents told me that my earliest drawings that were recognizable, or that I thought were recognizable, were drawings of chickens. Because we didn't raise chickens, but they ran wild and went on land. And drawing of a chicken looked like a teardrop sideways, with another teardrop on the side, which I explained with the chicken with baby chicken inside. Demonstrating my detailed knowledge of biology. Later, when I was 8 years old, I grew pirates because I was an 8-year-old boy. And now I draw about resilience in the face of depression. So it's really always been with organic. People, come to me who are art schools, say, from art school, and say, I've been doing all this art, and I'm really interested in social change. How do I connect them to each other? And that's a tough one for me because I never had the connection. It's always like at the DNA level, the root level, it's always because it's what matters to me, and therefore it's just not in my heart. I think of what I do as medicine. For me, social change has a lot to do with healing. The ways in which we harm each other and injure each other has to do with the historical basis we've been in, or our people have been in, and the relationships of oppression, domination, colonialism, and all the others that have grown out of it. And of course, that means both healing the world where these injuries are perpetrated every day and healing the harm and the trauma that resulted from that. When we moved to the States, from the mountains of Puerto Rico to the south side of Chicago, right? A little bit of open shop. 1967. You know what was hitting the fan in all kinds of ways. It was a shock in a lot of ways. My mother dealt with it. I started to do heavily. I even started doing that at that time. I moved out of home at the time I was 15, or when I was 15, actually. As did my sister. I dropped out of high school soon afterwards. Actually, I dropped out of high school, enrolled in another school in last year. And I've come to believe that hard though that was on a young person, that what prevented it from being traumatizing in a really paralyzing way was that around me were social movements that I could become a part of. Social movements whose explicit purpose was to restore power to people whose power had been taken away. That's also your elevator definition of trauma healing. So for me, being able to be engaged in this kind of activism was actually very stabilizing and grounding. Now, I could tell all of the artwork that's there has different stories. Much of it comes out of relationships with particular organizations, communities, in the places that I've lived and the places that I've been in relationship with. And I'll tell you a couple of those before we're done. But I wanted to say something about the idea of medicinal art. That if you're a doctor, a healer of whatever kind, an herbal healer, it doesn't matter. You walk into any situation, you sit with the patient, you don't know what the patient needs ahead of time. You have to pay attention. You have to learn their backstory, hopefully. You have to pay attention to what the body is telling you. So that you walk in, metaphorically, with your bag of medicine, your bag of herbs, because you might have to break a fever, raise fever, stimulate them in organizing. You might have to calm and depolarize the situation. You might have to polarize. Sometimes people are passively accepting harm in ways that's not healthy, and actually creating more polarization can create a situation where the sides can negotiate a peace. Right? So the organizer like a healer has to come in with all of these different possibilities to stimulate memory, to warn against danger, to reassure, to calm, to lower reactivity. That's a lot of it. I mean, one of the models that really impacted my trajectory in Chicago was the organizing that was being done by the Chicago chapter of the Black Panther Party. Okay? People have all kinds of ideas as to they were and what they were. But in this situation, they were organizing a coalition with a Puerto Rican group. But I also had connections with the Young Warriors organization. They started out as a street gang. And then there was Young Patriots, another street gang, who were young white kids out of the Appalachian migrant school, who had Confederate flags on their jackets. Many of them had family members back home in the clan. And when the Panthers encountered them at a public forum, and these white kids were talking about what they were dealing with in their community, and it was in a church, and it was being moderated by the more middle class people at that church and local organization. They showed some films, and where all these people were present. And the Black Panthers were kind of shocked at the way these privileged, liberal, white people were contemptuous of the young white working class men. And they felt immediately a panic. And they were wondering, it's kind of confusing, it's like, in a situation, in a society set up to privileged white people, how come these kids are hurting? What's going on here, right? It's a mystery. And that's the question they asked themselves, instead of how do we isolate these people with their toxic ideas, and they came up with the most brilliant strategy to find out. They asked them. They actually went to their some of their meetings. One of the pastors, a guy named Bobby Lee, who incidentally, his name was Bobby Lee because his parents' name was Robert Lee. He was about that. But they went to the forums, they went to shop food in their bar, and they found out that they had mountains of poverty. But some of the campers, I saw an interview with them, they had gone out to Uptown, the neighborhood of White Lake lived in. And they were shocked at the conditions of the housing, of the, we had these storefronts. It's like, man, this is bad thing we've ever seen. And they ended up organizing together to set up a community clinic, breakfast for children program, all the things that we were doing. Eventually they got rid of the Confederate stuff. Organized public forums around housing. And I didn't intend to spend that much time on that particular story, but the moral of it to me is that the way you organize across barriers is to make a better offer. Make it to say our vision is actually big enough to do. This is what we do. And that's really the foundation of what we are going to do. And in fact, it means that I'm not that big on bridge building. The way people talk about building bridges between people of opposite opinions, it's kind of to me that way. Where I say, okay, I'll give up a little bit of my anti-racist worldview, give up a little bit of the racist one, come to a compromise of what we have. What could go wrong? So for me, it's really about finding the common bedrock, a bridge across a gully or a chasm. How far do you need to go to find a layer that is common to all of us? One story about that when I was young, I used to hitchhike. That's how I got around the United States, parts of Canada. And I was already an activist kid, and I made myself really two promises. One was in riding around in cars with breakers, sometimes for hundreds of miles. I was not going to lie about what I was doing. The other promise I made was that I was not going to get myself killed. And I see recognize the tension. Well, I had to do that. I had to figure out, well, how do I find a common ground with somebody? And the example that I used is the Army sergeant who picked me up for a long ride. He picked up hitchhikers because he felt he would be paying a debt to the GI to hitchhike home on leave. And owed a debt to strangers, right? And basically believed everything I did. And, always hated everything that I did. So that in order to engage with him, I had to meet that challenge, the geology challenge. Where do I find the common ground to stand on? And what I learned was that he wanted his children to grow up in a better world than he grew up in the city of Manhattan. His children, some of them now grown, are having trouble paying their mortgage, which he blamed on brown people who the borders. He felt that all of the symbols were religious and political symbols, like Washington and the apple tree and all of these things, church, that were sacred to him were to ignore or disparage. Morality was being perverted by people he considered perverts who didn't honor the way in which he always learned them to be. So it was really based on these deep human fears and values. And what I figured out, or think I figured out, we never really know what we know for sure, was that most people's values are very similar. pretty much the same, but the narrative that gets piled on top of that to explain them with the need, that's where the toxicity lies. There was a famous duo in North Carolina. There's a movie made about them called Vested Enemies. The guy was a Nazi involved in the organization. She was a black community organizer, right? Not a lot of money. They ended up in the same federally sponsored school program, called the Civil Rights Education, and they were part of this community facilitated program, and they had to be exposed to each other. And, you know, when it was raining hard, they had to wait in the building until they get home. Found out that they had both had teenage kids who were having trouble. And ultimately became in Chicago, they started to scarcity and poverty. And long story short, they became partners doing anti-racist teaching. Became famous. But my analysis is that this guy always wanted to do best for all people. The thing is that his definition of who qualified as people was pretty narrow. So that through his relationship with her, the community that she gave access to, simply his world expanded, his values didn't change. But the meaning of those values is the relationship with God. So my father, who was involved in the freedom struggle with the free code, used to tell me that when two communities of people who are fighting for their identity are in conflict with each other, they're not asking big enough questions. There's a poster that I don't know if I have it upstairs, but a poster that I created for some immigrant workers in New Orleans. These are workers who have been brought in after Hurricane Maria to rebuild the city. People who had skills in sheetrocking and reconstruction. And they were brought in, a lot of them were undocumented. And several years later, after months of reconstruction had been done, the powers that be in the city decided, oh, hey, this is really cool. They finished the work, and now we said, so yes, they don't have documents. I guess it's time to call them and have them all recorded. Right? Their work is done. At the same time, the black community that was scattered to Baton Rouge and Houston and all the other cities started trying to move back into the city. And we discovered that the same city powers had raised the housing project, fired all the black teachers in the schools, privatized all of the schools, brought in young white teacher trainees for America into the program, and didn't want them back. And we started having this conflict between the black community leaders saying, this is our city and no one can take it away from us. And the Latino community leaders saying, we built this city, where the heck is doing the work? Right? And with the Jornaleros, the day laborers, Congress, the people who were posting, some of those people who think it's best, and said, can you make a poster, because we're building an alliance with one of the black community organizations, and our slogan is the right to remain. Or fully the right to remain with dignity of the Israel that man said from doing that. And we want to post it going to express that. And you know, the way it worked out, I was up in the north end of Mississippi, they were south, I come up with a sketch, sent it down to them. They projected on a wall of all 150 workers, all of whom critiqued it. And then they said, they'll be to put a streetcar in the boat. Who the heck is going to know that in New Orleans there's no streetcar? Cliche. And then, you know, we want some more black faces. We want to show that we're aligned. And they started using that to build coalitions around the right to remain for both communities. And marching on the projects together, learning each other's songs, demanding, and they wanted to demand that the sheriff stop calling the ICE stop calling the media and the word Latinos in the prison to check the immigration status. They sent me a video of them presenting the sheriff on the posters and arguing frame identification. They put them up the story. But again, it's that, and that's really what's in my art. If you look again at the art that's in the hallway, Some of it is dealing with some pretty harsh issues. I don't believe in sugarcoating anything. Let's just tell the truth, but at the same time, it doesn't mean nothing anymore. So an attempt to really tell what's going on with the way that it's also a withdrawal, also is an invitation. Because the only way we're gonna move forward now is if our descendants look back in 100 years and say that, wow, those were hard times and those people really came through and solved their problems. Because there will be vast migration, ideological migration of people shifting their beliefs, which happens all the time. So it's always important to leave that openness. Another of the principles that I apply in my art is, and another principle learned from ecology, learned from the land, in the forest, is that the soil is more important than the seeds. Say that again, the soil is more important than the seeds. And in social change, that means that the soil are the belief, the value, the assumption, the common sense that people in the community believe. That's going to determine how you can organize. For example, if everybody in the community believes or knows that school teachers are greedy and selfish, self-absorbed and don't care about children, it's going to be hard for organizers to win better working conditions for teachers or better budgets for schools. So changing that, and there are forces in our country who have worked for the last 40 years to demonetize teachers. They're preparing the soil so that they could now, in this moment, control education, privatize schools, etc., and both. And so creating, tending that soil, so that a lot of my art is about not only the immediate issue, but what are the underlying issues. In medicine, they talk about systemic inflammation, right? So that if my body has a lot of systemic inflammation, my nervous system and my immune system have to deal with so many toxins that it's constantly on alert. That means two things. One is that my body might start attacking itself because it just doesn't defend it called autoimmune condition. And also that it leaves me susceptible to, because I'm so busy fighting battles that I don't need to fight in my body, that the ones I do need to fight slip through the cracks. And people with systemic inflammation are more susceptible to get cancer or common cold. So as I'm organizing the social change agents, I say, okay, well, what is the underlying inflammation in society, right? Because you have all of these different issues to fight with, right? But what's underlying that? My opinion is that the underlying condition is hope, which is also very much the people are disappointed in the world that we live in what they're finding in the prospects for the future. And so all of my art is dealing with both specific issues, a specific campaign, sometimes it's a tenant struggle in a particular community. I mean, a lot of my posters are not on the website because they were made for very specific organizations in the struggle. Others of those ones that were made in the context by now more widely. But what was it?
Systemic inflammation.
Systemic inflammation, thank you. So that in all of those contexts, I feel like my posters need both in the situation and the underlying feelings of hope. Yeah. But that doesn't mean putting a smiling face on a heart situation. Right? And this is true for everyone, not just for artists. If I seriously want to help people gain hope so that they can move forward and make real change, I can't be pretending that everything's going to be okay. I have to actually need to go out there and learn. I have to walk toward what scares me so that I can find out how to get past it. Right? If I don't believe that there's a way through that part, I'm not going to notice the opening between the people that might path. And another thing that goes out of that is thinking in cycles. I feel the whole range of emotions. I can be angry, I can be frustrated, I can be heartbroken, I can be furious. for whatever reason, and I don't really know the answer, I don't despair. I don't experience that. And one of the thinking about it, what I've come to is that in fact, despair is normal. When we take in sensory information from our environment, right? And then our emotions are how we process and tell ourselves, what should we feel about it? Should I run for my life? Should I smile and open my mouth? Those are emotions. Despair is not an emotion. Despair is a malfunction. The emotional release it flips a switch that says, is this not even worth taking? Because there's no home. Right? It stops the analysis of my world, which exists so that I can find ways to meet my needs, but that's not going to happen. So that's one of the things I think that most needs to be dealt with in a world where people are fighting because of their disappointment and their sense of scarcity, is that issue of hope. Right? Which, that's another whole conversation, but at least I wanted to put it out there. For me, one of the ways in which I have that hope is through understanding. And again, I don't want to, sort of claim that I have the understanding or corner on the truth. It's always a struggle. But what the far has taught me is that in a particular moment, period in the decline of an empire, there are tendencies to become more authoritarian. That doesn't make it pleasant, but it also doesn't make it terrifying in the same way. Right? One of the things in working with organizations that I pointed out comes from Trauma Heal. When we feel powerless, we turn on each other. Right? Okay, so that means that in this organization, when maybe the question isn't why are they being so able? Maybe the question is, okay, let's step back and say, what is happening right now that is making people feel hopeless or powerless? What is it that is just happening? How can we feel that? Right? And these cycles are, these tendencies, these trends, these things are inevitable. But knowing about them can be really liberating. Just as somebody who's traumatized, right? To understand that, oh, this is how it works. Let's make it go away, but it also makes you feel more manageable. Because one of the things we experience in trauma is the sense that this will never change. Healing is something that happens to other people, not to me. But if we learn from what happens to therapy, oh, this actually, what I'm going through, other people go through, and get the path out of it, that can make a great difference. So again, part of the stories that I'm telling through my heart are stories of people who have been able to overcome. Right? The things that we face, that we feel like they're unique for us. Maybe they're not so much. But understanding also means finding out what is unique. And in this situation, growing food in the rainforest and growing food in the desert, totally different. But the problem that we're trying to solve is the same one. Plants in the rainforest and plants in the desert are still trying to get the right amount, not too much light, the right amount, not too much water, to not be eaten by predators and to find nutrients. And that's the same true across the board and in historical moments and in different organizations, different kinds of dilemmas. Right? Understanding what happens in health, in spirit, in ecology, in society, if we learn enough about any of them, we're really learning about all of them. Because the same kinds of revolutions should play. So when I talk about medicine and art, just a few examples. I have art that has actually tipped the balance in a union struggle. A local 300 workers where the management had made promises in the contract and then broken those promises. All the workers together wearing a particularly challenging shirt created a crisis where the postal service ordered them not to wear that shirt. And then they ordered the shirt without the word. And then the national got involved and they ended up conceding and finding the jobs that they promised to find. They said that if the postal center closes down, we'll find jobs for everyone within 30-mile radius. Because they didn't, they couldn't, and eventually they found a job. Big kind of change, big impact. At the other end of the spectrum, I've created posters that really only affects small circles of people. There's a series that my sister and I did for our body of people. Just telling stories of local families. We one about Soto, an elder who had grown up on the coffee plantation. The poster showed a photo of his collage. Thank goodness something in the photo. Collage with pictures of workers, the early 19th, 20th century workers with the mules, and photos of the same plantation he worked on as a child. At 12 years old, he would take the mules and go back to the far reaches of the plantation and come back. It would with the coffee, it would take them a day to make 2 rounds. So I made that poster and checked stuff out our names on the landscape. My daughter Olivia and I went back there and brought the poster to the store to feel it's part of the community. And the storekeeper said, I didn't put that. So we went to his daughter's house and asked for permission to release it to the community. And she said, come back tomorrow. And the next day we went back and said, yes, but we were blessing. And a year later, Olivia went back on her own. And we told her that a lot of the branches of the family, household, and the family didn't have photographs of them. And they used that poster to make altars in their home around. So it's again, to me, it's sort of, there's this whole spectrum, the way in which it's only telling a story. It's telling a story in a way that people can hear. I've had so many good conversations with people on the opposite side of the issue where I've made a poster that is like very controversial, the police poster up there, that we don't have common ground, but in being able to frame a story, art will get past some of those checkpoints. Because art is not only speaking to the brain, speaking to the heart. Right? And sometimes there's a disconnect. It feels like between the picture and the words. Like those words say that I'm on the wrong side of history, but those pictures are the history of the past. What's going on here? One of the things that people hunger for most is recognition. Who they are. When people talk in Minnesota about urban movement of life, right? It's like people in each of those places will be nice by the other. It's amazing what you can do. Say, I hear you, right? In therapy, there's something called keeping and meeting. Keeping means that if I'm sitting down with you, I'm a therapist in your plan. I sit down with you, I just let my body language mirror yours. The way I hold myself, whether I make eye contact, how loud my voice is, and our nervous system starts to become comfortable with each other. Then we start talking about things that outside would not work. And sometimes, again, therapy can take 2 years to get synchronized to the point where we can deal with other things in the mind. Sometimes it'll happen in half an hour. Right? So it's really, to me, the work of art, the work of social justice, the work of farming is all about tuning yourself to yourself. In the case of farming, also to the soil and so forth. And because we're determined to be in communication. To see that, you see these cute videos that we watch any of the online things with animals of different species that we kill each other, cuddling up each other. Because conflict has to do primarily with fear for our safety and fear of scarcity. And greed is the scarcity run off the rails, right? But the underlying value is you need to have enough. You need to have enough. If you're always scared of being hungry, then there's no end to so this was kind of thinking I like to be time to come so anyway, I want to take a breath here and let you all get very next quiet. When people think we're going to talk about art, I always yeah, thank you.
So we'll open it for questions. We have Ricardo or Ricardo. I did want to mention this little book that you said, even though it's having something Tending the soil is called. Second grade lesson for organisms. I want to read one statement. It struck me really eyes. For example, the first point in the program would be nobody gets seconds until everyone has first. That's simple, but really powerful. Nobody gets seconds until everyone gets first. If we live with that, think about the world, the world that we see. Questions? Comments?
I love the idea of just the world getting bigger instead of focusing on the concept, looking for the common.
It seems like your major thrust is
Can you
hope.
make sure?
It seems like your major thrust is hopeful, which makes me feel good to hear that. And that the opposite of hopefulness is not despair. What is the opposite of hope?
Here.
I think fear
Fear
is
and
the
love.
basis of so much in this world.
Yeah, and disappointment, it's paralyzing. Hopeful is for, your disappointment and hopeful is paralyzing. You know, people have asked me what makes you feel hopeful. And you see confusion about this. Because every animal that goes out of its burrow in the morning, is fluttering through the cars, looking for something to eat, is being gone by hope. That's sort of the life. So really the question is, what kind of abuse or harm on such a huge scale that it disables our inherent birthright? We're all born people.
I'm struck by the way what you're talking about doesn't seem to relate to our so strong concerns about politics and big issue government kind of thing. We're talking about people at a level of getting together that makes a lot of sense, I think a lot of hope.
Yeah, and a lot of it has to do with reactivity, right? When we're hyper vigilant and scared, because if you think about people who certainly are on the opposite side of the political side can be, who are anti-immigrant, white supremacists, et cetera, destroy the earth, you know, immediately providing a job. What are we dealing with? We're dealing with people whose fear for their own safety and fear of not having enough is still fully manipulated by people within the philosophy of the world.
I guess that was my question is, some of the people who have either been oppressed or disappointed or not recognized, we have other people in our society that manipulate that and use that to bring about things that aren't even helpful to them. And so I'm not sure how to get around that.
I think it comes down to making them better off. Like what I've seen in both among animals and among humans is that any organism will gravitate toward the best thing on the menu. But to have it on the menu, that doesn't mean that tell people there's another way. It has to feel credible. It has to be real. It has to be shown through examples. So that, you know, for example, if people believe that you can't have a world based on generosity because people are selfish, well, you create a community, a program in the community that is based on generosity. People need to experience that there are better ways to treat people. Another neo-Nazis who I story of that man in Wisconsin who later became anti-racist. This was really interesting. People who go in either direction. He was badly injured in a situation. His health was in jeopardy, and a Jewish couple helped him. even knowing who he was and what he stood for. And what he said later, that didn't change his worldview. Wasn't an epiphany, but with an accumulation of experiences later, he made a change of consciousness. He said that was always with them like a pebble in each shoe. It didn't go away. The accumulation of messages, right? There are people who will come and talk to me about the impact of my heart. I've been doing this for about 50 years, right? So there are people who say, you know, I just hope you look on my Twitter. But it's not sort of the accumulation of subtle messaging has had an impact on their direction. So I think it really has to do with the example we give. In the civil rights movement, I mean, as you know, there were a lot of white people who went south or went south supporting the civil rights movement. It's not because black organizers went and knocked on the door and tried to convince them to change their mind. It's because two things. The civil rights movement created a crisis that was so profound that people had to get off the fence. And it was either on the fence, these people on the fence with KKK on that side. And the other thing they did is that they modeled lesser community in a way that turned out to be a better offer. So that, yeah, sometimes if somebody is shooting at you, that might not be the moment to say, let's just sit down and have coffee. Right. Ways in which crisis makes that difficult. But you can create, it's like building a fire in the forest after a rainstorm. You are wet and hungry. You need to dry out. You don't try to hold matches up against the biggest wet log, even though you want it to burn, because all your matches will go off. You take the kindling, you take the little leaves from the bottom of the branches. While those are burning, you warm up the twigs. While those are burning, you were warming up the sticks. And eventually you get that log burning. And that's how it is change. That you don't necessarily want to go to the person who's the leader of the Nazi party but you need to start building from the center, building from where you are, expanding your own frequency. You have a roaring fire that's being drawn forward. And those people who are never going to be drawn forward in the gospel. And it's like a healing experience. I can tell that story and feel that there's weight behind it because I've been able to practice it the people's beliefs are so rooted in the media experience that people can really shift very widely and very dramatically in the way you do. You can say, how the heck did I thought that, right? And in a time of great insecurity, people can flip-flop a lot. There are people who were voting for white-wing candidates, and then they flipped over and they voted for Obama, and they flipped over and voted for Trump. They're just searching for vote. And people feel constrained. Like our lives are not what we want. I mean, we've accepted such content, right? It's like we know that if you're arrested for something, you're likely to get off with a lot of money. You can't afford a lawyer you want. That's just sort of background. Oh, that's just what we are. If you're sick and you have good money, you can get good treatment. And if you don't have money, then you might die before your time, right? And billionaires take joy in space while homeless children are on the street. And even more subtle things. We read the newspaper, we take it for granted that it makes sense that a board of directors can decide, oh, well, this is working where we want it to. We're going to lay off 5,000 people, move our factory out of the community, and leave them homeless and hungry because we can get lower wages to move going good. And I think there's a level on which our bodies know that we're disappointed in the world.
But then we start to feel hopeful.
Exactly.
That's
Because we just think that's what it is.
exactly.
I think that, the idea that no one gets sick is over the earth. Oh, almost everybody lives at a certain stage. But I used to listen to Rush Limbaugh, the right wing, radio, now and middle of that, and what I noticed about him and other people is that they weren't going to be able to convince people not to share half the food at the breakfast table. But they spent a lot of time convincing people that that only works on a small scale. It would never work on a big scale. So that actually being able to tell and show people that you can work on a big scale. That's being really important. You know, messaging. There's a lot of organizations that are involved in messaging. You know, finding out where people are at, so we can get a message across and get something. I'm a believer in truth telling. I know what people are wonderful. And tell that story, even if it takes time for them to do it. People suppress that. People know things deep inside. All I ever do is tell people what they already know. But we're told so much to so many people that it's not true. There is no hope. You know, we can try to help people make things better for renters or on healthcare or with wages. This is my favorite quote. It's going to hurt the very people we intend to help. Of course, people are telling us that. Then stop. But if they want to support them, you know, well, how do you help people? Oh, well, you give more money to rich people. And then everyone. No, I'm kidding. Any thoughts or questions?
It seems there are two approaches to making change. One is when people feel that it can't possibly get worse, they will revolt. And on the other hand, what this proposal is, those people, if there is hope, and change will happen.
Yeah. And I think that when people reach that point of, you know, rebellion because what I have to lose, that's not always done in healthy ways. And that's where preparing the soil comes in. Like if we're preparing, you know, we're spreading the knowledge of how change happens, how we're all humanized, all of the things that when people reach that moment of, oh my God, I think I've got it figured out, then the stories that are out there help you. When I was a kid, right, I had these movements that I could be attached to when I was feeling isolated and traumatized. That was healing. There's a lot of things I could have used from that are, we call them self-medication for trauma, right? That a kid who was able to join the civil rights movement and feel whole again was feeling many of the same emotions as the kid who goes to daddy's gun closet and walks to school and starts shooting. Because we live in a time where the soil has been filled with stories of shooting. So that becomes a model, right? We live in a world where more than half of the network TV shows, TV dramas are cop shows, in which cops break the rules in order to keep us safe. And the others are war, many of the others are war schools. And the video games, so we're creating a culture, we're creating soil. That means that when it's time for me to explode, those are the models that I have around me. But if we're creating other models to help things happen, that becomes very attractive because it's actually realistic. You know, these ideas of joining with other people to make change versus shooting off the person, they're not equal stories. You know, that one of them is actually feeling more in line with our nature, and the other is
Yeah, do you have any artwork that deals with the source of that fear, which just seems to be so pervasive and, you know, overcome some of the struggles that are destructive, but as soon as those are overcome, there seems like there are about 10 others that are popping up, and so looking historically, you know, we've overcome some of the struggles in our nation, but the whole Reconstruction area has now been, we're in that replaying that time right after the Civil War, it seems to me, and, you know, that there's just that. So do you have any artwork that upstairs or anything that points to that sort of a cesspool out of which so much of this evil, and destructive thinking, arises?
I don't know that I see it in so many words. I mean, some of the, sometimes I find a quote from somebody, or something beautiful, and I just illustrate it. It's what I try to model for you. And also through telling some of the stories. The one of the things, one of the ways to deal with disappointment, and you're talking about the constructions and mental that, is understanding how that's part of the cycle. That when we have setbacks, there's reasons for the setbacks. The explanation isn't, oh, well, everything's always open. And you see that, oh, I had a bad crop because it was bad weather, not because it's hopeless planting food, right? But no, that's a good question. Because it sort of feels like it's always in my mind, I can go back and look into my body of work. No, anything that says that in other words. We don't know.
I'm just so struck by the wisdom and truth in the way, I mean, we've all heard all these lessons before, you know, sharing, you know, I love, still with me, the soil is more important than seed, all these just life lessons come from experience that we've all seen, but I just really appreciate you putting in the work, giving you the context that kind of, you know, how can we take these and apply them to our world and ourselves and those around us. So just thank you for sharing this.
Well, maybe we should wind it up for now. During your conversation and your ideas and also playing part of sharing.
If I could just say this in one word, just sort of asking them sort of popcorn kind of way, and what comes to mind. What about this, either the art or this conversation, will you take with you? Either because it makes sense or it doesn't, or you just want to think about it.
I really appreciate when you talk about one side and the other, but what you need to do, it's not a bridge, it's finding that common thing. And it's a lot of times because life is so hard, you want to find the easier thing, like we're talking easy stuff. We're taught like we should do it now, right? And we can move on. And so it's easy maybe to build a bridge and walk across it and ignore what that is. It takes that patience, like we talked about, and really getting to know someone with that foundation, but it's going to take time. And we don't give ourselves time.
You want that fast forward.
One of the things that I see so often is that people are quick to take offense, even when it is not intended. And I wonder if there's anything you can help me out on that.
I think the most important thing is to try to listen to what they're thinking. Because it's triggering something, it's pushing a button, it's poking a wound. And sometimes, because of our life experience, we're not aware of the deep wounds of things that are just out there and leading and playing huge others. And yeah, that would be my first thought, right? And because we live in a moment of technical, people are even more sensitive than at other times about there's a whole variety of things that might be okay in a different era. But notice the moment that we're in, where everybody's on high alert, and you know, simply take as an article of faith that there's something going on with this person. Why that reaction on some level makes sense. It also helps you deal with road rage. Okay, well, maybe that person is really trying to get through the traffic and it's going all over because there's something going on that I really don't know. You can't get out of the road. Even though obviously it's pretty reckless. We good?
Thank you.
45, or in Zoom, with having an Indian dress class. And I'm not sure how that relates to your work, but it's about how you feel and how we work with others in their relationships. So, feel free to join us. It's in the bulletin, it's on the Facebook page on the website too. So, Jody Jones from the annual conference will be our leader.
And then if you would like to continue the conversation today, at 4 o'clock today, up in the commons, we'll be having a reception. For 7 Morales.
So we're gonna be at one of the offices, right?
Yep, yep.
Yeah.
Down the hall up there, so if you'd like to continue talking.